Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's Word of the Week with Princess V. This week, what God told me to tell each and every one of you is that the instruction that God gave you to do is not about you, it's about what God wants to do in and through you. Now, let me explain. Similar to what I told you guys last week, where we were talking about whether or not you feel qualified for what God has placed in your hands or given to you. Sometimes we sell ourselves short because the message that God has given us, we feel like is not for the season that we are in our lives, or we feel like it might be too big for our mouths, like like Yorubas would say, or we don't have experience in it. However, we need to learn to trust God, to know that what God has placed in us and the message that God has given us is for the people that He wants to hear this message through us. For example, Moses. When God called Moses, Moses was a stammerer. But what God wanted to do was not about Moses in particular, it was about what God wanted to do through Moses for the children of Israel. Now, of course, generally Moses benefited from it, but it wasn't necessarily about him and his inabilities or his lack of confidence. It was about the assignment God had placed in his hands. Let's talk about David. David was a shepherd boy that became a king. God in overnight changed his status, and all of a sudden he had a kingdom possibly in his hands. Now, of course, we know that when he was anointed compared to when he ascended the throne, there was time. But still, as at that time when he was anointed, don't we think that, like, he must have felt a certain way, but he must have looked at his shortcomings, his instabilities. Or let's talk about Esther, the girl who was an orphan living her best life, and all of a sudden she's being told that she's in the running to become the queen. These are various things that happen to characters in the Bible that God called, and God called them not because of who they were or because they were perfect, but it was because of what God wanted to do through them. Because of their imperfections, He was able to use them. So I'm here to tell you that whoever you are and wherever you are, stop looking at yourself. There's a generation of people that are waiting to hear the message that God has given to you. Stop looking at yourself and stopping yourself. Rather, look at what God wants to do through you. See yourself the way God sees you. See you next week. Bye.